Hello everyone, I'm Sebastian Cater. I am Head of UK Theatre and Workforce Development, and I'm really happy to welcome you all to today's webinar. We've got a slide on the screen telling you what it is, but I'm going to read it out just to make sure. It's creating a racism defense strategy. And we've got two fantastic presenters today. We've got Naomi Sambili from Chanua Health, and we've got Julie Clare, who is a theatre producer and the business director of Inc Arts UK, who heads up their anti-racism training and consulting programs. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the two of them and then some housekeeping, and then we'll kick off. Naomi Sambili. Naomi has worked for over a decade in the area of social innovation, mental health and research. Starting her career in research, she has worked as a clinician and more recently been focused on service and product design in digital healthcare. Her team at Chanua Health have developed a range of products and services embedding play, gamification and technology in areas of health, mental health and enterprise development. And an example of this can be seen through their Neuro Champions program, training young leaders in areas of the brain and mental health through immersive training, play and technology. Naomi is a Wellcome Trust Public Engagement Awardee and co-led the UK implementation of Hacking Health, part of a global network of healthcare innovators. And I'm also pleased to introduce Julie Clare. As I mentioned, Julie's the theatre producer and business director of Inc Arts UK. Julie's worked in the anti-racism arena since 2011 in her role as strategic director for Fresh Voices UK, an organisation dedicated to promoting the work of ethnically diverse writers to the top levels of the UK television and theatre industries. As a producer, she's a Stage 1 bursary winner. She produced Olivier award-winning Showstopper, the improvised musical, and was associate producer on two other Olivier award-winning productions, Baby Reindeer and In the Heights. To give you a little introduction to today's session, by the end of this webinar, during the webinar, you'll be able to identify the impacts of racism, including microaggressions. You will be developing an understanding of the traumatic impact of racism on you and others, and what is a trauma-informed environment. And you'll know how to prevent, develop strategies to mitigate racism in the environments you manage. So today's session should last about 90 minutes, and we can't hear or see you if you're attending, but you can ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box. That's probably the bottom of your screen if you're on desktop, or maybe another part of your screen if you're on a mobile or a tablet. So you can ask questions at any point. We'll see them, we'll keep an eye on them. There'll be time for questions at the end. And you can ask them anonymously, but also you can ask them as yourself. You can attach your name to it, that's fine. And if you see someone else putting a question in that you wanted to ask, you can just click on that and then that will rise to the top. We've got Miriam on hand and Natalie on hand today to support us with the tech issues, so thanks to those two. And also just to confirm that we are going to be recording this webinar, and once it's captioned, we will make it available to you all and to the world on theatremeansbusiness.info. Speaking of which, we have developed a range of mental health and wellbeing webinars, which we have programmed and distributed on theatremeansbusiness.info. It's obviously to help everyone in the sector through these pretty rough times that we've all been going through. And there's two types of webinars that we've programmed. Some of them are for everyone. They're about supporting your personal and professional well-being. And some of those topics include things like managing stress, staying resilient in uncertain times, and ways to wellness. And then the other 5 webinars have been for managers and leaders, and the focus there is on supporting the professional well-being of others. Some of the themes include nurturing resilient teams, making the business case for well-being, and strategies for organizational recovery. We've got a lot of people on today, which is great. Thank you to everyone who's bought a ticket. Thank you also to UK Theatre sponsors, Ecclesiastical, Spectrix, Theatre Tokens and Tizers. Their support has enabled us to provide sector assistance like these webinars. And also just to mention that any net profits from the sale of these webinars will go towards the Theatre Artist Fund, which provides emergency financial aid to struggling theatre freelancers. If you're watching this as a recording, you can still donate to Theatre Artist Funds if you like, and the URL is on the screen. It is theatreartists, plural, .fund/donate. Final message from me, just to say this webinar is presented by SOLT and UK Theatre. We are the UK's leading theatre and performing arts membership organisations, and being a member enables us to support your needs as individuals and of your organisations. And a lot of the work we've been doing the last year, as you can imagine, has been focused on government lobbying, local authority lobbying, and helping try and negotiate some of the funding that we've got through, amongst many other things. Being a member also enables us to support initiatives like theatremeansbusiness.info. So If you're already a member, thank you so much for your support. And if you'd like to find out more, you can go to uktheatre.org/membership. That's enough from me. I'm now super happy to be able to welcome and introduce Naomi and Julie. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a delight to be here with you for the next 90 minutes, talking all things racism defence. So hope you're ready for it with a nice cup of tea or glass of wine. I don't know if that's too early right now. Cup of tea. Myself and Julie will be with you. As Sebastian said, if you have any comments or questions, please do pop them in the chat. Just to briefly say that myself and Julie started working together, I guess, through InCarts around 8 months ago, when we developed InCarts Minds, which is a mental health support for people who have experienced discrimination or racism within the arts sector. And I guess from that work that we initially started as a concept to develop more and more, so we've been providing therapeutic groups and one-to-one support. And so we're here today to be able to sort of think about how you as managers and leaders within the theatre sector can support your teams, support your audiences to challenge the impact of racism and hopefully eradicate it over longer periods of time. But that's quite a big challenge to be asking. So I'm Naomi Sambili. I'll quickly just pass over to Julie to do a brief intro of herself.
I think Sebastian did a marvellous job. I know some of you, not all of you, but it's really lovely to have you here. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Naomi.
Thank you. It's like tennis. So our agenda for today, we'll be initially sort of defining terms that we talk about in relation to racism, whiteness, structural racism, and thinking about how we can utilize them within our organizations. We'll then move on to think about the traumatic impact of racism and also microaggressions as well. And we look at it from, I guess, a physiological impact, so how it impacts the body, but also on the brain as well and the brain responses. And we want you to leave with some practical things that you can do within your organization. So we're going to think about 5 things that you can do today to go away within your organizations to be able to support people, and how you can create trauma-informed environments within your theatres, within your teams, and also at an individual level. So as Sebastian said, you know, our outcomes for you are to understand and define racism, to think about the impacts that racism have on individuals, but also on collectives as well. Think about how the traumatic impact of racism on other people, but also on yourself as well, can play out, and how you can create trauma-informed environments, and how can you mitigate the impacts of racism in environments that you manage. We wouldn't exist today, and we wouldn't be here talking about this subject if it wasn't for the struggles and a lot of the tragedies that people have experienced, and brilliant racialized leaders, elders, artists, and authors and scholars who've done work before us. And we're directly benefiting from the work that they've done, the experiences that they've had of oppression, of discrimination, because of the systemic racism and personal racism that they've experienced. So we honor the gifts of writing, poetry, art, academic research, published studies, articles, recordings, and stories, both that are written and also orally transmitted. We're committed to honouring their experiences by working for real change in this area. Again, it's a triggering topic. So what I would ask you and invite you to do is to understand your reaction to some of the things that we'll talk about today. You may feel triggered personally. Sometimes you might not be able to listen. You might think, this doesn't really happen. Or you might even go into defense mode, because that's a natural way, especially if we feel attacked by some of our behaviors or some of the experiences that we've had. And this is all perfectly normal. So what I would ask you to do is to just be aware of your own responses, your own thoughts, and the things that you hear today, and think about how they apply in your work environments and also in real life situations as well. So thank you, and I'll pass on to Julie.
Okay, so we're going to start with a short video from an 18-minute TED Talk by John Byron. He heads up the Centre for Documentary Studies at Duke University in America. And while you're having a listen and a watch, maybe make a note if there's anything that comes up that you haven't heard about before. That might be helpful. But other than that, I'm going to ask Miriam to start that video.
And yes, in the ancient world, there was lots of slavery, but people enslaved people who didn't look like them, and they often enslaved people who did. Did you know that the English word slave is derived from the word Slav? Because Slavic people were enslaved by all kinds of folks, including Western Europeans, for centuries, right? Slavery wasn't about race either, because no one had thought up race yet. So who did? I put that question to another leading historian, Ibram Kendi. I didn't expect he would answer the question in the form of one person's name and a date, as if we were talking about the light bulb. But he did. He said in his exhaustive research, he found what he believed to be the first articulation of racist ideas. And he named the culprit. This guy should be more famous or infamous. His name is Gomes de Zurara. Portuguese man, wrote a book in the 1450s in which he did something that no one had ever done before, according to Dr. Kendi. He lumped together all of the people of Africa, vast, diverse continent, and he described them as a distinct group, inferior and beastly. Never mind that in that pre-colonial time, some of the most sophisticated cultures in the world were in Africa. Why would this guy make this claim? Turns out it helps to follow the money. First of all, Zurara was hired to write that book by the Portuguese king. And just a few years before, slave traders, here we go, slave traders tied to the Portuguese crown had effectively pioneered the Atlantic slave trade. They were the first Europeans to sail directly to sub-Saharan Africa to kidnap and enslave African people. So it was suddenly really helpful to have a story about the inferiority of African people to justify this new trade to other people, to the church, to themselves. And with the stroke of a pen, Zurara invented both blackness and whiteness, because he basically created the notion of blackness through this description of Africans. And as Dr. Kendi says, blackness has no meaning without whiteness. Other European countries followed the Portuguese lead in looking to Africa for human property and free labor, and in adopting this fiction about the inferiority of African people. I found this clarifying. Racism didn't start with a misunderstanding, it started with a lie. Meanwhile, over here in colonial America, the people now calling themselves white got busy taking these racist ideas and turning them into law. Laws that stripped all human rights from the people they were calling black and locking them into our particularly vicious brand of chattel slavery. And laws that gave even the poorest white people benefits, not big benefits in material terms, but the right to not be enslaved for life, the right to not have your loved ones torn from your arms and sold, and sometimes real goodies, the handouts of free land to white places like Virginia, to white people only, started long before the American Revolution and continued long after. Now, I can imagine there would be people listening to me, if they're still listening, who might be thinking, oh, come on, this is all ancient history. Why does this matter? Things have changed. Can't we just get over it and move on? Right? But I would argue, for me, certainly, learning this history has brought a real shift in the way that I understand racism today.
Okay. One thing that I omitted to do was to ask if anyone who is watching has done any kind of anti-racism training or unconscious bias training or EDI training, if you could pop that into the chat, that would be really helpful. Because what I'm about to do, not that it will necessarily change it, but just brace yourself. I'm going to try and give you a capsule version of some of the issues and some of the terms, just so that we're all on the same page. Oh, lovely, I can see things popping up in the chat. Okay, so I'll go back into that in a second. But as you've probably gathered from that clip, which I'm not going to lie, blew my mind when I first saw it, is that race is something that we invented. 99.999 recurring % of my DNA is exactly the same as Naomi's, and hers is exactly the same as mine. The only difference is literally the color of our skins. So race is a social construct. It is not based on fact. It is distinctly different from culture, heritage, ethnicity, and it was created very clearly and very consciously to enable discrimination against people based on their perceived value. So if that's race, then racism is attitudes and actions based on the belief that people have different characteristics, qualities, and abilities based on the race, which of course has been assigned to them. Racism is always harmful. Even if it's not done with a bad intention, it's still harmful. The one that I always think of is kind of back to the 60s, when people spoke about Martin Luther King Jr. and they always said, oh, he's such a credit to his race, without realizing the inherent racism in that statement. So their intention was good, but the harm was still done. It's visible and invisible. It's personal, it's structural, and it damages people's lives in visible and invisible ways. And that's everyone's lives. Because race as a concept has been embedded in our societies for centuries, it has significant impact on all people. Whether you've been socialized as ethnically diverse in whatever your heritage may be, or socialized as white, we've still all been socialized. We have to talk about race, even though we know it doesn't exist, but we have to talk about it because it may not exist, but we built it, so now we have to dismantle it. And one of the reasons that I and a couple of the other trainers at Inc. Arts do the work that we do, and let's acknowledge the fact I'm white, is because the burden really shouldn't fall always, as it seems to do, on people who are ethnically diverse to educate us or to dismantle racism or to fight that fight. We can absolutely do that. And I'm going to assume that that's why every one of you is here today. So thank you. So if that is race and racism, let's look at how racism operates. The word prejudice is a really interesting one to me because I think people confuse it with racism. And actually, racism is what happens when prejudice is given power. So prejudiced people can have harmful beliefs, but prejudiced beliefs can only impact other people when they are allied to power, the ability to control or effect change or difference in someone else's life. Racism without power is a prejudiced belief that, yes, okay, so here's an example. I can shout the N-word at someone in the street, and that's a hateful act. But there's a difference between that and when I'm hiring, building my creative team, building my stage management team, doing my casting. If I only hire people who look like me, I have a certain amount of power. We did a training recently where someone asked the question, well, how can I possibly have any power to affect change because I can't control the penal system or the government or the health system or the education system? So we asked that person, what do you do? And they were the technical manager of a theatre. And we said, and do you have a team of people under you? And they said, yes. And we said, how many? And they said 5. And we said, do you make decisions about the hiring and recruitment of those people? And they said, yes. And we said, there's your power right there. There is a phrase, eating the mountain one bite at a time. And that is what we are endeavoring to do. which is eat the mountain one bite at a time. And that means that the accretion of small things will get us to a tipping point where hopefully major changes really start to happen. So when working with power, authentic leadership is the essential modifier that enables the wise use of power. Both organizational leadership and personal leadership are in this Zoom webinar today and are an essential part of dismantling racism and creating an equitable future. That's how we think about it. Often I realize that visual representations are sometimes easier to get a message across. So I would like to invite Miriam to share a clip from a wonderful Channel 4 documentary called The School That Tried to End Racism. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may not have. I urge you to go and have a look at it if you can. It's still up on the Channel 4 streaming service. But Miriam, if you could give that a play. Oh, I think we're going to have a little gallop through. I've just got to say this as well. It's really weird not being able to see people. Okay, I've owned it. I saw in the chat that it was making somebody cry, so just take a moment and have a breath. I love that program, and as I said before, it really is worth watching because it shows you both what white privilege is and how it manifests, and it begins to open up an understanding of what structural racism actually is. One of the analogies that I use a lot when I'm talking to people about the importance of anti-racism training is what is success for me as a woman? As a woman, I know that if I have not hit 35 with a husband, 2.4 children and a glittering career, which somehow I'm managing to juggle superbly, then I have failed. Because why do I think that? Because Hollywood tells me that, because the internet tells me that, because newspapers and magazines tell me that, because the radio tells me that, and because we've internalized it to such a degree that my mum and my granny and my aunties and my cousins all tell me that as well, because we've internalized it. And then you find yourself hearing questions like, well, when are you going to get married? Or when are you going to have kids? I mean, I'm way beyond that now, but all of those questions, because that's the image, that's the picture we have. The idea that there might be alternate pictures that also look like success, like adopting children, fostering children, not wanting to have children, being polyamorous, being in a relationship with someone where you don't live in the same house, being gay, being lesbian, being anything on the gender identity spectrum. We have one picture. And in the same way, society tells us that whiteness is the norm, that even though we are the global minority, because we are the majority in this country, that somehow whiteness is the thing, and that anything that deviates from that is abnormal or not to be trusted or concerning. The structures discriminate against those who are perceived to be inferior based on their deviation from white Anglo-Saxon Protestant norms. I don't know about you, but when I was at school, I did not learn about colonial history. I didn't know until I went to see Martin McDonough's A Very, Very, Very Dark Matter at the Bridge about the atrocities that were committed in the Belgian Congo. I had no idea. I mean, that's just leaving the UK out of that equation, but we are right in it, as we probably all know. So white supremacy, when we talk about that, and I know that that can be a very alienating term, but I would define it as the belief that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant norms are the most culturally desirable. God, I wish I could see you all. I will also put this in the resources that we send out at the end, but I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of Layla F. Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. It is a brilliant way to kind of work through issues and bring things that might be unconscious up into the light so that they can be dismantled. Right, okay. So if you want an example of white privilege, I'm now flinging it back to Miriam for next slide, please. This for me is a classic one. What do you notice? Same crime, same courtroom, same judge, same criminal history, but a 1,300% difference in sentencing. That is one example. There are so many. One of the things I'm thinking of is an article that I recently read about, I think he was in his 30s. He was of Nigerian descent. He had a British passport. His right to be a UK citizen was questioned by the Home Office. They took his passport. Now he can't prove that he had a passport. Things like that. We're seeing it all in the news all the time. So that takes me on to equality and equity. And I bring this up because I've had a lot of these conversations with people where they've said, but you know, if we're going to be equal, why are some people getting special treatment? An analogy to that, and again betraying my age, is back in the 70s and 80s when men's clubs, like the Reform Club and the Arts Club, were told that they had to allow women in. And yet there were still clubs that were exclusively for women around. And I remember conversations about, well, why do they get to just be women and keep men out when we have to have women in our clubs? And the answer to that is, for me, that there is a difference between equality and equity. Equality assumes there is a level playing field, but we don't have that. It just doesn't exist right now. And you are also trying to mitigate centuries of inequity. Miriam, could you pop up the equity versus equality slide, please? Some of you may well have seen this. I just love this. I don't generally read from PowerPoint slides, but I'm going to read from this one. In the first image, it is assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. They are being treated equally. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for access to the game. They are being equitably. In the third image, a day I can only hope will come, all three can see the game without accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The system. I just love that slide. Okay. Idea of non-racism versus the concept of anti-racism, and there is a world of difference between those things. I know that as a white middle-class privately educated theatre producer, I could quite happily live my life without ever having to interact with anyone who was from a different race than me or ethnic heritage. Because I can sit there going, well, I'm not racist. I know I'm not racist. You know, I don't believe in any of that. But, you know, if someone's going to bring something up about it, I might get a bit uncomfortable and think, I don't really want to engage. You know, you can't change people's minds. Or I might disagree with overtly racist behavior, but still not challenge it when it crops up. That's being non-racist. It's very comfortable, but that isn't going to change anything. So what we're asking of ourselves as a sector is to become actively anti-racist. You take an active stance, which means you tune in, you become aware of, and you challenge racism when it shows up. You interrupt racism and you model positive change. And practically, the way one of our lead trainers always describes it is make a noise. If someone starts telling a racist joke that you're not comfortable with, just go, huh? Oi, what? It just sticks a pin in it for a second and everybody kind of wakes up for a minute. And then an incredibly helpful question that I find useful is, where did you learn to think like that? Because it allows you to open up a conversation without putting people into a defensive place. Not always, but a lot of the time. So, given that you've now had a whistle-stop tour of terms and issues, etc., it's time to look at the effects of racism upon the people who are experiencing it, so that you have a better understanding of how it operates, why it operates the way it does, what the effects are, and what you can do to create a trauma-informed environment. And for that, I'm handing back to Naomi.
Thank you very much for that, Julie. Thank you. And I guess the position that we take is that experiencing racism and discrimination is traumatizing. Quite simply, it's a traumatizing experience. So what I'd like to ask people to pop in the chat, when you think about trauma, what comes to mind? What is trauma for you? Please feel free to write in the chat. So what's the experience? Upset, yeah, definitely. Damage. Something that's lasts longer than the event, the lasting impact, grief, pain, something that stays with you, shock, isolation, an occasion that stays with you longer than the event, yeah. Damaging, heartbreaking. Yeah, definitely. Having to minimize, life affecting completely. And I think that somebody put in the chat that the video was making them cry. And I would say that's sort of secondary trauma. So, you know, the experience isn't happening to you directly, but actually sometimes observing and seeing someone experiencing it can cause trauma as well. And I guess that trauma is the emotional response to a terrible event. And that might be an accident. It might be an assault. It might be a natural disaster, a point where you might feel that your life is in danger or that your life is harm. Yeah, so you feel an overwhelming sense of fear and danger, and as a result of that, your body goes into shock and your body responds to that. And there can be a range of different scales of trauma, and we're all individuals, so we all react very differently. But you might go into shock, denial, and typically sometimes if you have traumatic stress, that might last longer. So it might start to impact your relationships, how you can interact with people around you, and the response is normal, but often in the context that we're in, it's not seen as normal. So trauma, like everybody said, and all the comments that you've made are completely right. It's an emotional response to a terrible event. However, when we think about racial trauma, we think about it in a slightly different way, because racial trauma is an ongoing result of people experiencing multiple traumatic events. And so that might be within the span of a day, it might be within the span of a decade, it might be in the span of a lifetime, it might be intergenerational. Okay, so you know, racial trauma is an ongoing result of racism, racial bias, and exposure to racist abuse via the media as well. It can affect people instantaneously, it can affect their lives, and also in the long term affect relationships, working environments, and also more importantly, their ability to feel safe in the context of where they're at. Okay. So I'm sure everybody's heard the term microaggression. It's used so much now, isn't it? It's everywhere. But again, I'm going to put out to you, when you hear that term, what thoughts come up for you? You know, what do you feel when you hear the term microaggression? And please feel free to pop it in the chat as well. Every day, okay? Every day. Anything else when you hear the word microaggressions? Tiny daggers, that is very physical and visual, yes. An eye roll, unawareness of behavior, exhausting, might not feel like it's worth addressing. Yeah, definitely. So the sort of physical elements of microaggressions is behaviors, difficult to prove racism, difficult to respond to. Yeah, it's not tangible, is it? Sometimes, you know, you can't really sort of pick it out. Underlying issues, thoughts and beliefs. Thought without thought or care. Yeah, definitely. Harmful. Keyword. I'll pause at harmful. I'll pass over to Julie just to think about microaggressions in a very physical way. We're going to show you a video for that. So actually, maybe Miriam, could I ask you to bring the video up? Microaggressions as mosquito bites. I'm thinking of that term, harmful.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while...
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date...
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
Going grocery shopping.
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV.
We have to keep the Redskins' name. It's part of our culture and history.
Or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day.
Can I touch your hair?
Multiple times a day.
So pretty.
Can I touch it, please? Can I please?
Is fucking annoying. And makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
I think that's a really good visual example of showcasing microaggressions, because mosquitoes are horrible, aren't they? We all have been bitten by a mosquito at some point. I'll pass on to Julie.
Just something that Naomi and I were talking about before this. I worked for, well, I still do, for nearly 2 decades now, I think it is, with someone who had founded an organisation, which Sebastian mentioned at the beginning, dedicated to promoting ethnically diverse writers. And we would go into meetings with television executives. And they knew what the purpose of the company was, and they knew why we were coming to talk to them. And they knew that the organisation had been founded by a woman of African and Caribbean diaspora descent. And we would walk in there together, and they would hold out their hands and they would say her name and look at me and talk to me, thinking that I was her. Because even with all that information, somehow in their brain, it just didn't compute that the Black woman walking into their office was the head of the company. So I perfected over quite a long period of time the art of breaking eye contact, because they would still address almost all the conversation at me. So I perfected the art of breaking eye contact so that they had to switch their focus. It was a really interesting dynamic to watch play out, but it was also incredibly hurtful every single time. And the thing I like about, I can't remember if it's included in that video, but it really does explain why sometimes you say something, you think you're saying something nice, and I've made as many mistakes as any white person on the face of the earth. So you say something, you think it's nice, and you get a reaction where you go, that's disproportionate, because you're not factoring in that something similar has happened to that person probably about 10 or 20 times that day. Back to you, Naomi.
Thank you. And I think that there's, I guess, practical examples of what microaggressions might look like in theatre as well. You know, and I don't know, do you want to add a few more things on there, Julie, as well?
Okay, so another friend was on tour. Digs had been arranged, arrived at the digs. The landlady opened the door, took one look at them and went, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I tried to get in touch with you, but my mother-in-law's just come to stay. I'm afraid we don't have the room after all." This is an actress in her 20s who then has to sleep in her car because she doesn't have the money to pay for a hotel or even a B&B. Goes to the company manager the next day, tells them what's happened. They say, "Okay, we'll sort you out some other accommodation. Come back to me in half an hour." She goes back in half an hour, and they say, "We found you somewhere else." And she goes, "Have you told them," and this is back in the 80s, "have you told them that I'm Black?" And they go, "No, why would I do that?" And she went, "Did you not hear what I said to you before? I don't want to have to go to another set of digs and have exactly the same reaction. You have to tell them." And the company manager went, "Well, I've sorted it out. That's all I can do." Things like that. look at it from the point of view of costume. Another friend of mine was in a production panto of Robinson Crusoe. At the presentation of the set and the costume designs, discovered that her costume was going to be a grass skirt. At which point she went, no, I don't think I would be comfortable wearing that. Has it occurred to you to maybe use something like kente cloth, where in Birmingham, there'll be plenty of places where you can go and get it, and put me in an African national dress, rather than putting me in something that makes me look like the stereotypical portrait of what white people, particularly in colonial times, termed savages or natives. Took a lot of pushing for that to happen. We did the Speak, Listen, Reset, Heal conference, which Sebastian knows very well, in partnership with SOLT and UK Theatre. And as part of that, we did a listening exercise. Every example I've talked about today was reflected in that, particularly when it came to costume and to hair and to makeup. It just defeats me that if you know that you have an ethnically diverse cast, you don't automatically make sure that you have someone in post who understands Black skin, Southeast Asian skin, hair, and the needs of those things. I'm not being massively articulate right now, but I think you get what I'm saying. So those are some of the examples of things that not only have happened, but are still happening on a daily basis within our sector.
Thank you for that. And I think that, you know, with those microaggressions, we see these as traumatic experiences. And if people experience them multiple times a day, their body is going to respond to those. And all of us respond to traumatic experiences in very similar ways. So Miriam, could you bring up the brain development slide? Because I just want to go into a little bit of neuroscience. I'm not going to go too detailed, but just to explain, because it's good for each and every one of us. Because again, sometimes and I touched upon it at the beginning, when we feel threatened, our body responds in a certain kind of way. And so our brain, I guess, is made up quite simply, and this is the simplest description of it, of 3 different sections. And so you've got your reptilian brain, which is the sort of ancient part of your brain, and why it's called reptilian is because it aligns with other reptiles as well. And this is the regulatory system, so it regulates your sort of bodily responses. So things like temperature, blood glucose, and it releases hormones. So if you're under threat, this is the system in your brain that responds instantly. And when the body perceives a threat, it probably responds after about 20 milliseconds. Okay, so you've got that reptilian brain. Then you've got your limbic brain, and this is the part of the brain that manages the emotions. So you might have a threat, or you might perceive a threat, and emotions like fear might develop. You might get anger, anxiety. So this stimulates your arousal system and triggers your bodily responses from your reptilian brain. So if you get ready into your fight or flight, and I'll speak a little bit more about fight and flight. And then you've got the top part of your brain and the newest, least evolved part, which is the neocortex, which translates thoughts into emotional states. Okay, so that's the area of your brain where you can start to make rational decisions. But that takes a little bit longer to kick into gear when you perceive a threat. So you have your reptilian part, which is your body's natural responses, and that takes 20 milliseconds. And then you have your neocortex, sorry, that might be my microphone banging on my top. Sorry, Sebastian, and sorry for everybody if you could hear the occasional banging. And then you have your neocortex, which responds after 300 milliseconds. So it takes a lot longer for you to rationalize a threatening experience, okay? And so why that's important is because we can't make conscious decision if we innately believe something is a threat, okay? Our body will just respond naturally to that experience and to that threat. And what happens when our body responds to that threat is it goes into fight or flight. So if you can pass on to the next slide, please, Miriam, and we'll go to the one after that. Yeah. So I'm not sure wherever you are if you see a tiger, but I like to use a lion. Sorry, not a tiger. A lion is a good example. It's not a tiger. So if you see a lion, naturally, you would respond because it's threatening, especially if the lion is looking at you like that. But actually, when we experience racism or experience sometimes an anxious thought, our body responds in exactly the same way. And it perceives that threat in a way that it has to respond to it. So you can see the responses as like the 5 F's. So it will either fight, so the body will get ready to physically fight, push, struggle, say no to the situation, okay, the threatening situation. It might flight, so it might try to put distance between the situation and danger. So it might run, back away, sort of like disappear, maybe not come in, feel quite stressed. You might freeze. And so in a context of somebody experiencing racism, they might go silent, they might not respond, they might slowly over time feel they haven't got a voice, right? They might flop. And that's like a physical response as well, because actually what's happening is an automatic response to reduce physical pain. So physically, people might flop, they might sit down, or they might call out for a friend. And that might be a peer, or it might be trying to befriend the person who they perceive as being dangerous by trying to negotiate with them, bribing, pleading with them to try and manage that survival situation. And again, it's not giving the person who's perpetrated the problem consent, it's trying to survive that specific situation. And now when we've experienced a traumatic event, and you can go back to the school that tried to eradicate racism and the young people who may have experienced traumatic racism at that stage, that is often stored in our brain. And the way we're feeling at the time is stored as a memory. And so when we perceive similar situations, or we're in similar situations, our body will instantly respond in that same way, and our physical responses will be triggered. So if you could go to the immediate body responses, if possible, Miriam. So what happens is your reptilian brain will release chemicals called noradrenaline and adrenaline and cortisol, which are getting your body ready for fight or flight. Okay, your heart will start to race. You might have heard some banging then. You might start sweating. Digestion stops because it's getting ready to run away or fight a situation, which in that instance, if you are under attack, is really important. But if this is happening multiple times a day and it's over a prolonged period of times, it causes physical damage. Yeah? So longer term impacts and emotional responses that are shown on the next slide, please, are chronic stress, fear responses, hypertension, sadness, depression, post-traumatic stress, cardiovascular problems, and anger. And often they're sometimes the responses that we see in people. We don't see what's happening internally to their responses to racism and the different microaggressions that they've felt. But it is a very physical and it is a very psychological response to the environments of which they're in. So you can have the overt, but it's often the covert and the microaggressions that have this physiological response within people. Okay. If anybody has any comments or questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. So we want to move on now to think about what you can do. So if you know that within your environment, people are experiencing racism, or there's things that we can all do to create our environment to be safer for people of colour and who are racialized and marginalized people. If we can move to the next slide. What we want to do is, and the next one, think about how you create an environment that's perceived and felt safe by everybody. And the only way you can do that is by asking and having open conversations with your team and with your staff members. And one of the things that's come up quite a lot in our therapeutic groups that we've provided is that people haven't felt safe in work environments to have these kinds of conversations. They haven't felt safe because it might impact their jobs. They haven't felt safe because there is no route for change within the organization, or people haven't been empathic and haven't understood their perspective. So they haven't even been able to have these initial conversations. So being able to create safe spaces is really, really key for people. Julie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was just gonna, and tell me if I'm wrong, because you are the expert in this area rather than me. But one of the ways it kind of really hit me was when we're talking about the adrenaline release and the cortisol release, when you are stuck in fight or flight mode, but because you look different than the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant norm I referred to earlier, you know that you can't turn around to that company manager and go, oh, don't want to swear, but you know, get angry. You can't get angry, because if you're a woman, then you're an angry Black woman. And if you're a man, then you're violent. And the next thing you know, there'll be a call to the police because you're being out of order. And I am generalizing hugely, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And then if you can't express that as anger or as a fighting response, that cortisol is just there all the time. And that cortisol causes raised blood sugar. You can't flee because you can't change the color of your skin. So that's not an option. I'm not going to go through the other strategies that Naomi referred to, but what it means is that those hormones are switched on in your body all the time. And that is why you see massively higher instances of heart disease, of high blood pressure, of diabetes amongst ethnically diverse populations. It's not a genetic predisposition. It is a direct result of continually facing microaggressions, facing racism. That's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, completely. And I guess, you know, creating a sense of belonging within your team. And this is something that will transcend all areas of well-being and people feeling comfortable and safe. Having supportive structures and having clear spaces where people can connect with other peers within their organizations. And I think that sometimes if people are the only person of their race within an organization, they can feel incredibly isolated. And so peer networks between different theatres is really, really useful and important to set up. So can we go into the next slide? What we wanted to do is create an acronym. Everybody loves an acronym, or maybe hates acronyms, I don't know. But you remember acronyms a little bit more than not. Of 5 things that you can do within, I guess, your organization to support staff members who might experience racism, but also to think about how you can start to eradicate and break down some of those structural issues around racism in your organizations. And as you can see, there's a beautiful visual on the right hand side of an ear. So the acronym is an ear, which I guess links to listening as well, providing a listening ear. But the first thing you can do is awareness. And part of that is being here today. And I saw in the chat that a lot of people have already been on training, whether it's anti-racism training, equality diversity training, conscious bias. So educating yourselves on issues related to racism. I mean, we'll talk about InCarts Unlock a bit later on, but there is a wide range of resources now. And I think after George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, it's meant that these things are easy to access. One thing I would say in awareness raising is do not place the time and the emotional labor on people who are already burdened on this issue. So setting up advisory groups with brown people and asking them their opinions is not a way of raising awareness, especially if you're asking them to do it for free. And also thinking about, this is a traumatic experience, so they're having to unpack their trauma. If there's no support for them to be able to contain that emotion that's come from that situation, what are you doing in there? So do not place the time and emotional labor on people. The next one's non-resistance. So we just spoke about, I guess, your body's arousal system. And when we feel threatened by something, you'll go into fight and flight, you know. So if someone's saying you're racist, your organization's racist, you have structural racism within your organization, the natural thing you're going to want to do is to defend yourself as an individual, but also defend the organization as well. And that's natural. But what we've got to do is be open and aware of those natural responses that will come within us, but also that there are alternative views and experiences to your own and to other people's as well. And engaging in honest conversations, being able to hear and listen to people who've experienced racism regularly, and doing so with an open-hearted mind. I always talk about open hearts and minds because, you know, it's important. You know, we've got 1,000,001 things to do in our day, and compassion is often not at the forefront of the things that we're doing. So being non-resistant and being very aware of your natural responses is key. Empathy. And we talk about empathy a lot, but empathy is bloody hard. You know, it's not easy to be empathic, especially now when we've all been going through the trauma of COVID and so many other different things. And it requires a lot of self-examination, self-reflection as well. And it requires you to be open and aware and acknowledge that underlying everything, we are all similar. We're all humans, and the construct of race is being created to separate us. And so to be able to stand in someone's shoe that's different to us, we have to initially start to change ourselves as well. So to be able to be truly empathic, we've got to be able to change ourselves and our own perspective. So empathy is very, very key. Action. Firstly, witness racism. And sometimes we can switch our eyes off to it, and if we've not experienced it, we don't see it. So being able to witness things, and like Julie said before, making a noise, it might not be that you get up and say, I can't believe that was a racist statement. Don't you ever say that again. Get out right now. You don't do that. And we don't always feel comfortable. And that might also not be appropriate for the context as well. But acknowledging it with a noise, acknowledging it, or having a conversation in a non-confrontational way, like, where did you learn to think like that? What makes you say that? Why is that acceptable? Is really, really key. Action and things that you can do, creating safe spaces in your workplace for staff to express their feelings. And that might not be within the working environment. It might be going to a therapeutic group like we've been running with Arts Minds, but having a space for people to just be able to express and offload some of the experiences in an environment where people believe them, and don't have to second guess, and instantly know where people are coming from, is really, really important. And I guess alongside like the fight and flight response, the way to combat that is rest and digest, And so, if you can have environments where people can relax, and this might be linked to your linked to your well-being sessions you've been to before, but having spaces for breathing, having sort of chill out spaces and zones, allowing that in people's working schedules. Also simple things like chewing counteracts our fight and flight response because it triggers your digestive system, and so if you can eat, it means you're not under threat anymore. And so things like that are really key to know. And this doesn't change the need for structural shift for racism, but it is things that can be done instantaneously to manage people's anxieties, maybe when they get into the office in the morning as well. And finally, reflection, and it links to empathy, but reflecting on your own experiences as somebody who has grown up and been from a dominant culture. Reflecting on the power that you have to make changes. And often we feel like we're powerless, especially to make changes with structural racism as well. But it starts at an individual level. And, if you manage one person, or if you manage 500 people, if you can hire, if you can influence marketing, then you have the power to make the shift and the change. So reflecting on your own personal experiences and your own personal influence and power is something that's key. I will pass over to Julie now.
So there's one thought that's really uppermost in my mind and has been for a long time, which is, it feels like we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy into defending against the possibility that someone might call us racist. What would it be like if, instead of putting all of our energy into trying to hold that off, we just went, you know what? Yeah, I am inherently racist, and took that energy that we've been using to defend against a potential accusation and turned that into making change. And the reason I say that is because the time I grew up in, the education that I received, the lack of knowledge that I macerated in around anything that didn't relate to whiteness, makes it completely understandable that of course I'm going to be racist, because I'm ignorant. And I'm addressing that, but I've macerated in the same thing that we all have, which is a culture that is continually telling us that we are the norm, which goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. So I offer you that as a thought. There are many ways that we can take that energy and turn it into making small but significant changes in how we deal with applications, in how we hire, in how we run auditions, in how we market to diverse audiences, in how we manage the hair and makeup, in how we lead in terms of being production managers or being crew members or being creative team members, of even how we manage our PR and our sales strategies. And that leads me very neatly on to Arts Unlock. For those of you who don't know, this came out of Speak, Listen, Reset, Heal. Arts have created a website, www.inkartsunlock.com. I'll send the actual correct URL around afterwards if that's not right. But it works in this way. Think of it a bit like a survey monkey. You can go in, it has over 100 anti-racist best practice benchmark actions. Thank you, Sebastian. It is .co.uk. But over 100 actions that you can take in different areas of your practice. They are divided broadly into 3 sections. One is around hiring, one is around work and care, one is around leadership. Within hiring, you have 3 sections, which are advertise, recruit, and welcome. Well, you can see it, and you'll get it in the slides after this as well. So I'm not going to narrate it. But for each action that you choose to sign up to when you go through this process, there is a timescale and a set of choices of timescale. So you can say, I can commit to X action within the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. At the end of going through that process, you get an automatic email that lists all of the actions you've committed to and all of the timescales tied to those actions. When I'm working with organizations around this, one of the things I recommend, depending on how they are structured, is don't necessarily just leave it to your anti-racism or your EDI subcommittee on your board, or just to your executive director and your artistic director. It helps sometimes to broaden that out and to let the people who head up different areas of your organization take ownership of their section of Ink Arts Unlocked. So if your head of marketing can take the marketing actions and look at those, preferably with someone else in their team. So you make it a conversation. It means that you are looking at the issues as you are choosing which commitments to make. It also means that when you get the report at the end, you can kind of, you know for a start that a lot of people in the organization are already taking ownership of the change. And the other thing that you can do is then use it as the start of a very clear anti-racism action plan that can support and be embedded in your overall strategic or business plan. In doing that, the next step is to start saying, okay, we've committed to this action and we've committed in this time frame. Now, how are we going to do it? And who's going to be responsible for it? And it starts becoming a fuller, more rich thing that can actually make practical change in your organization. Just a couple of other things that I'd like to talk about before we go into the Q&A very quickly, which is we're also offering a service called Speak Out Safely, which is where you can use Ink Arts as an anonymizing third party. So rather than going to your ethnically diverse staff and saying, oh, tell us, as Naomi was talking about, tell us what your issues are. It's like, no, but they can tell somebody who's neutral, and that person can anonymize the feedback, which means that you're going to get it in an unvarnished form, whereas often it comes to us so palliated that it's easy to dismiss. It's easy not to hear. But if you get it anonymized, but, you know, bald, then you can go, wow, okay, I did not realize this was the experience people were having. Now I know what I need to change. So that's something else. And then there are free things that we offer. We're starting an Ally Zoom in June, which you can come to carry on the learning. That's completely free. We recommend that when people have done anti-racism training within their organizations, they either create a buddy system or they create an anti-racism book group or film club. You can do it once a month, once every 2 months, but it means you're carrying on the work, because everything we do is a start on a journey. It is not an end point. And with that, I am now going to be quiet and let you ask some questions.
Thank you so much, Julie and Naomi. That was really fantastic. Some very sobering thoughts and ideas, and also some really great practical suggestions. So just to remind everyone in terms of using the Q&A, so if you're on a desktop, it'll be at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on a phone or a tablet, it may be in another part of the screen. So you might need to just check around where the best place is to find it. The questions you can ask anonymously, or you can ask as yourself. Either one is fine. And if you see a question that someone else put in, and you know, they put in a way you were going to put it anyway, you can just sort of like it, and then that'll rise to the top, so we can sort of see, we can see which are the most popular ones. One thing I stress with these Q&As as well is that we've got a great group of people attending live. We are live in the present moment, but also we are a recording. We will be a recording, so we are also going to be happening in the existing in the future. So for those people who are watching this as a recording, we're relying on everyone who is here with us now live to ask some juicy questions. And I can see there's one that's appeared in the box. That's fantastic. I'll let you, Julie, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, that was about speak out safely, and is there a cost? Yes, there is. There is an annual cost. What we do with that is we supply an organization with a dedicated email address that comes to us. So it's got an Incarts UK suffix, but it's got your organization as the first part of the email. That gets checked daily. Then if anything needs to be escalated quickly, we can get straight on it. We then will work with you if there is something that is more crisis management than something that's feeding into a 3-month report. We can work with you both on how to mitigate it, change the environment that caused it in the first place, and then we can go back and report back to the person who has raised the issue, or the people who have raised the issue. And we can also advise you on your comms in terms of how to communicate the changes you're going to make to the organization. So 3 reports a year to you, and then after the report on how things are going to be mitigated, comms support. It's an annual cost of £1,500 a year. For anything that's big crisis management that's going to suck up time, there is an additional cost, and I can send brochures out if you're interested in having them. But what I would say is we did it that way on purpose, because obviously the better you do, the less crisis management you're going to have. I really hope that helps.
Thanks, Julie. There's a question in the chat. I'm just thinking, because of the people watching as a recording, they won't be able to see the chat. If you could just read that out before answering it, that would be awesome.
Sure. Really interested in working through Unlock, but we've already started tracking our work and actions. Is there a set approach you prescribe, or can we put in our own process and use Unlock to help track and record it? Yes, you absolutely can. And in fact, there are places in every section of Unlock where we say, is there something that you're doing that we haven't thought of? Tell us what it is. And then you can even track that. So if you have things that aren't even in Unlock, you can still track them that way. I hope that answers the question. Oh, it's epic. Excellent. Please don't hold back, because I really would like to say this. I have made more mistakes in this area than you have had hot dinners. The best solution to that is to just go, oh, I really screwed that up. I'm really sorry. Go away, have a think, come back, have a chat. So don't be afraid of getting it wrong, because there is no learning that ever happens without people getting it wrong.
There's a lot to be said for that, Julie, isn't there? That idea of sharing the journey that we're going on. I think you touched on that earlier, and yeah, I think there's you know, some of the conversations we have with our members, there's a real desire and a motivation to do this work, and as we've seen from the chat, there's people doing it in different ways. And I know also from speaking to people in the sector that, you know, there's still that sort of fear of like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Or, you know, I want to wait until I've done it and then I'll tell people. But I think you're right. There's something about the honesty, and actually just for all of us being able to share the work that we're doing, things that work, things that don't work, being honest about the mistakes we make. But absolutely, you know, the more we can all talk about this, whether in a public way or just, you know, like you talked about, those peer groups, it'll help us get more familiar with the language of this area, which is still new to a lot of people. And also, I think that idea that there is just one way of doing this thing, and there isn't. You know, like you look at any other the thing we do, whether it's marketing, whether it's fundraising and so on, there's not like a rule book. There's not one thing we do, and if we just follow that, then it's done. You know, it's always changing and evolving, and there's different approaches, and that sharing the work feels like a really positive, powerful thing that people can do as well.
I completely agree with everything you've just said. I would add in something that seems contradictory, but genuinely isn't meant to be, which is that one of the things that we're in the process of doing in work with a whole raft of clients is developing some checklists. I don't know if you all know about, and I cannot remember names or pack drill, I'm too old, but there was a radical innovation that I think came out of America in medicine, and particularly for surgeons, of the checklist. where they would do a checklist on what equipment was in the operating theatre when they started and what equipment was in the operating theatre when they left. So, so that you didn't end up with swabs left in people's abdomens. And it was initially resisted by surgeons until the research showed that if you implemented the checklist system, the percentage of items left in people went down to about under 1%, I think it was. So we're looking at checklists around marketing, around HR and recruitment. I mean, most of it's contained in Unlock anyway. Sorry, I just see that there are a couple more things. There's one in the chat. So there's a reflection that in this person's experience so far, sessions training like this seems to assume white leadership of organizations, whereas the process can require nuance and additional thought if organizations, brackets like mine, close brackets, have leadership including people of global majority backgrounds. This is absolutely true. And I think we make that assumption because the majority of organizations are white-led. It is beginning to change. I notice it in the training. We do anti-racism training, but we're also doing something called working in white spaces, because it isn't always comfortable for ethnically diverse people to be in trainings with white people. So a different training that was more centered to their experience was really important. Rehiring processes. Can you help us understand the difference between positive action legal and positive discrimination illegal, and examples of how to use positive action in our recruitment? I am not a legal expert, but I will tell you that if you go into Unlock and you go into the work and hiring and then the FAQs, you will find everything in there that you need in order to be able to hire effectively without breaking the law. And another one in the chat. As a Black leader, /manager, producer, executive director of a Black-led team, I would love to hear more about navigating a defense strategy for protecting both myself and my team in a professional manner. Are there any resources you can share on this? Okay, so I don't know about you, Naomi. I can't, because it's not my area of expertise, but I will say that the working in white spaces training that we're doing has a lot of learning in it that has been developed by our lead trainers. So if you want to get in touch, I will happily put you in contact with them to maybe have a bit of a chat about that, because part of the reason for working in white spaces as a training is also because we assume that ethnically diverse people have an understanding of history and context that isn't necessarily the case. I absolutely will. And I've watched sessions where people have gone, oh my God, I thought it was just me. And I didn't know this about how this came about. And at the end of that training, we look very specifically at what strategies you can use to mitigate things when you are working in white spaces. So I'm hoping that would be a transferable learning that might be useful.
Definitely. And through the Ink Arts Minds, we've been doing therapeutic groups, and I guess part of it is touching on identity and roles and strategic roles for people who are Black, Asian, running organizations, and how you support yourselves and your teams as well. So I think through the Ink Arts Minds, there may be some work that we can connect with and talk to you a little bit more about as well. So we're happy to, I know Sebastian put contact details, but we're happy to talk more about it afterwards as well.
The answer about, is it possible to access the Unlock actions without signing up? No, you do have to sign up, but it doesn't matter. You can sign up with any email or any organization name if you just want to go in and have a look. And you can also save it as you go. You don't have to do it all in one go. You can do a little bit, go away, come back. So yeah, don't worry about that side of things. It doesn't have to be official, but also you can change it later. So you can go in to have a look, make some random commitments and random time frames. It will send you your report, but it doesn't have to be official. You can even put a note in there going, this is just me trying it out. And then you can come back to it when you feel ready to actually kind of officially do it.
Just Julie, the benefit of doing these things from home is that I can run and get a book. I just wanted to double check. you were talking about a book about tackling white supremacy. Is that Naomi?
I believe I was. I don't know
the
how
reason why I
yours
wanted to share.
Yeah.
I do not have a book to share. I just have my hand.
It's like snap. The reason why I wanted to bring it up, you already talked about how useful it is, but also just what I wanted to mention was there's another one which is obviously linked to it, which is the blue one is a sort of workbook. But I just wanted to mention to people, because other people I've spoken to in the industry about it, they've actually found it a really useful resource to work on with teams. You know, the book is, if you haven't read it, the book is designed in a way which is it's a series of questions and actions. It's very much sort of interactive, so you know, you can use it in your organization, whether yourself, your organization, your teams. So it's another sort of arsenal, if you like, in the toolbox to do some sort of self-reflection and some self-learning on this journey.
And that's actually what we are going to do in the Ally Zoom. The way I'm planning to structure it after the first session is that every alternate session will be working through another part of the Me and White Supremacy workbook. The intervening sessions, we're inviting guest speakers to come in and talk about their relationship with their white best friends, if they have one, because it's about looking at how does your life change when you do welcome otherness, difference, other things into your life. I am not being at my most articulate, but what are the challenges of those friendships? What are the joys of those friendships? How does working together or experiencing your lives together or witnessing each other's lives together make them richer? Because it certainly has for me, for whatever that is worth.
Thanks, Julie. I'm just looking at the time, and I think we might need to start wrapping up. Actually, questions have come to an end for now, but like I said, in a moment we'll get your contact details on the screen. So Naomi and Julie, thank you so much. So yeah, if we can just have the slides up. So there's different ways of getting in touch with Julie and Naomi. Just one moment. So Julie, you can contact her through her website, which is julieclare.co.uk. Sorry, I'm reading this the wrong way around. Naomi's website is chanua.co.uk. So Chanua is CHANUA.co.uk. And then also IncArts, there's various ways of getting in touch. There's an email, admin@incarts.uk. The website is incarts.uk. And Twitter is IncArtsUK1, Insta is IncArtsUK. So lots of different ways to get in touch with everyone. And just to mention as well, we'll send some links through. We'll send this deck through afterwards, and also there's a few links I can send through in terms of some of the work that SOLT UK Theatre are doing in this area. There's an evaluation report from the conference that Julie mentioned, the Speak, Listen, Reset, Heal conference. On the evaluation report, it does talk through the process. There's also some of the testimonials that people talked about in terms of experiences they've had of racism in the industry, and there's also it highlights some of the actions in Unlock as well. There's also, like I mentioned, there's a diversity and inclusion document, some of the work that SOLT UK Theatre are doing in this area, so that we're just announcing that today. So do check our LinkedIn profile, which is under Society of London Theatre and UK Theatre, and our Twitter is UK_theatre. So thank you so much to everyone for attending these sessions. Thank you to everyone who bought a ticket. Thank you to our sponsors. So that was Ecclesiastical, Spectrix, Theatre Tokens, and Tizers. And remember that if you're watching this as a recording, there's the option to support Theatre Artists Fund through the website theatreartists.fund/donate. We're going to be sending you all a survey. And feedback is it's a really simple way of letting us know how this was for you. And it's only a few questions, just takes a couple of minutes. So we'd really encourage you to fill that in, and we'll then pass that on to Julie and Naomi. And one other thing, Theatre Means Business. So we've got one more live webinar coming up, which is next week, which is Monday, the 24th of May. And that subject is Staying Resilient in Uncertain Times with Lily Stout. But we're gradually introducing the recordings. As I mentioned, they're being captioned, and they are now going to be appearing on theatremeansbusiness.info. There's a few of them already, so do check that out. There's been some fantastic sessions in the last few weeks. So really, that just leaves me to, for one more time, thank Julie and Naomi so much for such a fantastic session. And thank you everyone for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you soon, maybe on Monday. Otherwise, at another webinar, undoubtedly. Thanks, everyone.